Ethan had ridden this trail 1,000 times in his life, yet today it felt strangely silent. The sun was sliding down behind the rough desert hills, turning the sky a pale orange and filling the dusty road with long shadows. He guided his tired horse along the familiar path, thinking only about getting home, eating something warm, and resting his aching back. It had been a long day of fixing fences, chasing stray cattle, and walking under a sun that felt hotter than usual. He wasn't expecting anything unusual to happen on the way home. Cowboys lived simple lives, and surprises rarely came their way. But that quiet evening, he heard something that made him pull the reins hard. It was faint, like wind mixed with a voice. He held his breath and listened again. There it was, a soft, shaky sound, almost like someone trying not to cry. Ethan's heart tightened. This trail rarely had travelers, especially near sunset. Whoever it was, they needed help. He nudged his horse forward, following the sound. As he reached a curved part of the trail, he saw a broken wagon on the side of the road. One of the wheels had collapsed, and supplies were scattered across the dirt. A lantern lay on its side, burned out long ago. A few pieces of fabric fluttered weakly in the cool breeze. The scene looked abandoned, but the voice came again, this time clearer. "Please, someone." Ethan jumped down from his horse and moved carefully. He wasn't the type to assume danger, but he also wasn't foolish. He approached slowly, looking around. Then he saw her. A woman sat on the ground next to the wagon, leaning against a fallen crate. She looked exhausted, her clothes dusty, her hands trembling. Her hair was messy, like she had been fighting the wind for hours. She tried to stand when she saw him, but her legs wobbled, and she barely managed to keep herself upright. "Ma'am," Ethan asked gently, "you hurt?" She opened her mouth to answer, but only a dry, broken whisper came out. Ethan hurried closer, stopping a few feet away so he wouldn't scare her. The woman took a slow breath, trying to steady herself. Her eyes looked scared, but not of him, of her situation. She tried again, but her voice cracked. She pressed a hand to her ribs, then said in a shaky breath, I can't hold it in anymore." Her words hit Ethan like a sudden gust of cold wind. He didn't understand what she meant. For a moment he panicked, thinking she might be about to faint, collapse, or worse. The way she gasped made him fear she was badly injured, maybe bleeding inside or unable to breathe. He froze in place, unsure if he should support her or call for help, though there was nobody around for miles. The woman squeezed her eyes shut, as if fighting pain. Ethan stepped forward carefully. "How long have you been here?" he asked softly. "Since morning," she whispered. "Wagon broke. I tried to fix it, tried to lift it, but—" She shook her head weakly. "I couldn't anymore. I can't." Her breathing grew uneven, and Ethan could see how drained she was. Her lips were dry, her face pale. Sweat and dust mixed on her forehead, showing she had been struggling for hours under the sun. Ethan crouched beside her, keeping his voice calm. "Can you tell me what hurts?" She shook her head again, frustrated, and pointed toward the wagon with trembling fingers. Ethan followed her gesture, trying to see what she meant. Shadows covered most of the wagon, but something didn't look right. Boxes were thrown everywhere, one entire crate smashed, and the broken wheel was twisted in a way that didn't seem normal. It looked like something was stuck beneath it. The woman swallowed hard. "Please, help. I can't hold it in anymore." Her voice cracked on the last words. Ethan felt a knot of fear twist in his chest. He wanted to help her, but he didn't know what he was dealing with. He stood up slowly and walked around the wagon, examining the damage. As he got closer, he heard a different sound, a faint, pitiful whimper, almost too quiet to notice. Ethan's brow furrowed. That wasn't human. He crouched down and gently pushed aside a few torn pieces of cloth. Then he froze. There, trapped under the broken wheel, was a small animal, a young coyote. Its leg was pinned under the heavy wood, and it was covered in dust and splinters. The poor creature trembled, breathing shallowly, its eyes dull with pain. It didn't look aggressive. It looked helpless. Ethan stared in disbelief. He hadn't expected this at all. Behind him, the woman whispered, "I found it hurt. It crawled under the wagon. I tried to lift it, but I couldn't. I didn't want it to die. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The worry, the fear, everything." Ethan turned to her slowly. She wasn't talking about herself earlier. She had been talking about the creature. She hadn't been able to hold in her fear, her guilt, her helplessness. She didn't want to leave it suffering. The realization struck Ethan hard. This woman, alone on a deserted trail, had tried for hours to save a wild animal, even when she herself was exhausted. He looked back at the injured coyote. It was young, maybe abandoned or separated from its pack. Its leg looked badly stuck, the wheel pressing into it at a painful angle. Ethan felt a wave of sympathy, not just for the animal, but for the woman who had fought so hard to help it. Still, he hesitated. Coyotes could be dangerous, even young ones. Cutting it free could cause it to panic and bite. The wagon could shift and crush his arm or leg, and the woman wasn't in good condition either. He needed to think carefully. But the woman's weak voice reached him again. "Please, if you can, help it." Her tone wasn't demanding. It was desperate. She had done everything she could until her strength ran out. Now she was trusting a stranger simply because she had no one else. Ethan took a slow, deep breath. His heart beat harder and his hands tingled with nervousness. He hadn't expected to face a choice like this today. He looked at the coyote again, seeing its small chest rise and fall weakly. It was suffering. He knew that instantly. He rose to his feet and looked at the woman. "I'll do what I can," he said quietly. Her eyes filled with relief. Ethan grabbed a sturdy piece of wood from the ground and jammed it beneath the broken wagon frame, trying to create a little space. It barely moved. The wheel was wedged deep in the dirt, heavy and stiff. Ethan wiped the sweat from his forehead and studied the structure. The only way to free the animal was to cut the wheel loose. The thought made him hesitate. Cutting the wheel meant the wagon could shift suddenly. It could collapse. It could injure him. He could make things worse. But leaving the animal trapped was not an option. Not to him, not to the woman. He pulled out his knife, a sharp tool he always carried for ranch work. When the woman saw it, she gasped softly, thinking he might hurt the animal. But Ethan shook his head. "I'm not hurting it," he said gently. "Just trying to cut the wheel free." He knelt, gripping the wooden spokes of the wheel. The wood was old and brittle in some places, but thick in others. Cutting it would require strength and precision. He steadied himself, took a deep breath, and pressed the blade into the first spoke. The sound of wood cracking echoed through the still desert air. The woman watched, holding her breath, her hands shaking as she gripped the crate for support. Ethan kept cutting, trying not to let the wagon shift too much. Sweat dripped down his forehead. His muscles burned. His heart pounded harder with each piece of wood he sliced through. He had no idea if the wagon would stay balanced or fall. But he kept going. Because a stranger had placed her hope in him. Because an innocent creature was suffering. Because deep down, Ethan had always believed that if something needed help, you helped, no matter how small or wild it was. He paused only for a second, checking the coyote. It watched him with tired, frightened eyes. But it didn't growl or snap. It almost looked like it understood he was trying to help. That gave him the courage to keep going. Finally, one last cut remained. Ethan braced himself, knowing the wheel might shift violently. He gripped the knife tight, exhaled slowly, and sliced through the final piece. The wheel snapped. The wagon groaned. Dust rose into the air. The woman screamed his name, though she didn't even know it yet. and Ethan felt the entire weight of the wagon tilt dangerously toward him. When the wheel snapped and the wagon suddenly tipped toward Ethan, everything seemed to happen in slow motion. Dust filled the air, the wood creaked loudly, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Ethan felt the weight shift fast, and he threw himself backward, his boots sliding in the dirt as the wagon leaned dangerously. The woman gasped loudly, pressing a hand over her mouth, terrified that the wagon might fall on him. But Ethan moved quickly. He grabbed the support beam he had wedged under the wagon earlier and pushed it hard with his shoulder, using every ounce of strength he had left. The wagon trembled, tilted a little more, and then, finally, settled back into a shaky balance. It wasn't safe, but it wasn't falling either. Ethan stood still for a moment, catching his breath. His arms stung where the wood had scratched him, and his palms burned from gripping the wheel so tightly. But he didn't worry about that. His eyes went immediately to the young coyote. The animal was free now, or at least no longer trapped. It lay trembling on the ground, breathing faster now that the wheel wasn't crushing its leg. The creature looked scared and confused, but Ethan could see in its eyes that it wasn't aggressive. It was just hurt. The woman let out a long, shaky sigh of relief. She pushed herself up a little, trying to get a better look at the animal. Her voice was soft, but filled with emotion as she whispered, Is it alive?" "Yes," Ethan said, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Still breathing." "We got it out in time." He knelt beside the coyote again, moving carefully and slowly so he wouldn't frighten it. The animal tried to lift its head but immediately winced and collapsed. Ethan gently touched the metal trap of the wheel marks around its leg. The limb was swollen and bruised, but he was thankful to see it wasn't broken in more than one place. It would be weak, but not lost. The woman watched him with great admiration, even through her exhaustion. She had never seen someone handle such a situation with calm and kindness. She had half expected him to give up, or worse, harm the animal to end its suffering, but Ethan never even considered that. His hands moved carefully, his eyes stayed focused, and he didn't complain, not even once. "You saved it," she said softly, her voice trembling with gratitude. Ethan glanced at her and gave a small, simple nod. "You did most of the saving," he replied. "You're the one who stayed with it all day." The woman lowered her eyes. "I tried," she said quietly. "But I wasn't strong enough. I couldn't lift the wagon. I thought I'd just watch it fade away, and I couldn't hold that feeling inside anymore." Her words made Ethan pause. He realized she had been carrying fear and helplessness for hours. No wonder she looked so drained, so defeated. She wasn't just tired physically, she was completely overwhelmed emotionally, too. Ethan approached her slowly. "You didn't fail," he said in a calm, steady voice. "You did what you could. That's all anyone can do." The woman blinked rapidly as if holding back tears of relief. She leaned her head back against the crate, breathing deeply, finally allowing herself to rest a little. Ethan knew she needed water, food, and a safe place to spend the night. There was no way she could stay out here. He looked at her wagon. One wheel was ruined, so she wouldn't be able to continue her journey until it was fixed. "Do you have water?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "I had some earlier, but I used most of it trying to keep the coyote calm. I didn't think the day would go this long." Ethan nodded and reached for his saddlebag. He grabbed his canteen and handed it to her. "Drink," he said. Slowly. She took it with both hands and lifted it carefully. The moment the water touched her lips, her body relaxed a little. She took small sips, not wanting to be greedy, but every drop brought strength back to her. When she finished a little, she returned the canteen gratefully. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't mention it," he replied. Ethan then shifted his focus back to the coyote. The creature was no longer trapped, but it still needed attention. He didn't want to leave it lying out here helplessly. He removed his outer shirt and folded it into a soft pad. Gently, he slid it under the animal to give it a bit of comfort. The young coyote whimpered, but didn't snap or growl. It trusted Ethan in a way that surprised both him and the woman. "You think it will make it?" she asked. He looked at the injured limb again. "It'll have a hard time for a few days," he said honestly. "But animals are stronger than we think. If it rests, it should recover." The woman smiled weakly. "I'm glad. I don't want it to suffer." Ethan gave her a kind look. "You're a good person," he said. "Most folks would have walked away." She shook her head. "I couldn't. When I saw it lying there, so small, so scared, I couldn't leave it alone. But then the wagon shifted, and I couldn't move it anymore. I kept trying, but I felt so helpless." Her voice trembled again. "That's why I said I couldn't hold it in anymore. It wasn't pain. It was everything: worry, fear, guilt. I couldn't keep the feelings inside." Her honesty touched Ethan more than she realized. He understood that kind of fear. Fear of doing the wrong thing. Fear of not being enough. Fear of watching something suffer and being powerless to help. He remembered how he had hesitated earlier. For a moment he had been afraid, too. But the sight of her struggling had pushed him to act. He had done something dangerous, yes, but necessary. He sat beside her and gently asked, "What were you doing out here alone?" She took a deep breath and explained. She had been traveling to visit her sister who lived on the other side of the valley. She didn't have much family left, so her sister was everything to her. Their mother had passed the year before, and since then, the sisters had grown closer. She wanted to surprise her sister with a visit, bring some supplies, and spend time together. But halfway through her journey, the wagon wheel had hit a deep hole in the trail and snapped. She had been stranded ever since. "I thought maybe someone would come by," she said, "but the road stayed empty. I didn't want to leave the wagon behind, and when the coyote crawled under, I couldn't walk away from it either. I didn't know what to do." Ethan nodded. Her situation made sense now. She wasn't reckless, just unlucky, stranded and caring too much to leave someone or something behind. He admired that. "You can't stay out here overnight," he said. "It's too cold after sunset, and there are wild animals around." "I know," she whispered, "but I didn't have the strength to walk anywhere." Ethan looked at his horse, then at the woman, then at the wagon. "Listen," he said gently. "I can take you to my ranch. It's not far. You can rest there tonight. In the morning, I'll fix your wagon wheel and you can continue your trip." The woman hesitated, not because she didn't trust him, but because she didn't want to trouble him. "I don't want to be a burden." "You won't be," Ethan said simply. "Nobody should be left alone in a place like this." She stared at him for a moment, studying his face. She saw nothing but calm sincerity in his eyes. Finally, she nodded softly. "All right, if it's not too much trouble." "It's no trouble," he said. Before leaving, Ethan made sure the coyote was in a safe spot. He carried it gently, carefully supporting its injured leg, and placed it near a group of rocks beneath some shade. He gathered some soft grass, forming a small bed for it. The animal whimpered weakly but stayed still, its eyes half closed. The woman watched him with awe. She had never seen a cowboy go to such lengths for a wild creature. Ethan then helped the woman stand. She wobbled a little, and he steadied her without making her feel weak. She thanked him softly. Together they moved toward his horse. He helped her climb onto the saddle, and then he mounted behind her, holding the reins. Before leaving, the woman looked back at the coyote one last time. She whispered something, a quiet promise that she would come back to check on it. Ethan saw the softness in her eyes and felt something gentle stir in his chest. They rode together as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in deeper shades of orange and pink. The trail felt less lonely now, less silent. The woman leaned back slightly, finally letting her body relax. Ethan kept the horse steady, guiding them toward safety. The quiet of the evening felt different than before. It wasn't heavy or frightening anymore. It was peaceful. For the first time that day, the woman felt safe, and Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: purpose, connection, maybe even the beginning of something unexpected. Their journey to the ranch was just beginning, but both of them already knew that this night would change the rest of their lives. The ride to Ethan's ranch had been quiet, but not an uncomfortable silence. The woman, whose name Ethan still didn't know, leaned slightly against him because of her exhaustion. Ethan kept one arm steady on the reins, guiding the horse carefully down the familiar trail. The sky slowly shifted from orange to deep blue, and the cool night breeze brushed past them. Each moment felt calmer than the last, as if the world itself was settling down after the long day. When they reached Ethan's ranch, the woman finally lifted her head and looked around. The place was simple but strong. A small wooden house stood near the edge of an open field. A barn sat a short distance away, its doors slightly open, glowing with the warm light of a lantern inside. A few chickens rustled around near the fence, and one old mule raised its head lazily to look at them before returning to its hay. The quiet ranch felt safe, peaceful in a way she hadn't felt since morning. Ethan helped her off the horse gently. She tried to steady her legs, but still wobbled. He placed a careful hand on her arm, making sure she didn't fall. She whispered a soft, "Thank you," embarrassed by her weakness, but Ethan didn't judge her at all. "You're tired. Anyone would be," he said softly. Inside the house, Ethan lit a lantern and set it on the table. The warm glow filled the small room. There was a fireplace, a wooden table with 2 chairs, and a shelf with simple but well-kept dishes. Everything was neat, as if Ethan liked order and quietness in his life. The woman could tell instantly that he lived alone. There were no children's toys, no women's scarves, no extra pair of boots, just Ethan's quiet world. He gestured toward a chair. "Sit down. I'll get you something warm." She lowered herself into the chair, feeling the relief of finally resting properly. Her muscles ached, her eyelids felt heavy, and her throat was still dry from the long hours without water. Ethan moved quietly around the kitchen, heating some broth on the stove. The smell filled the room, comforting and homely. After a few minutes, he placed a warm bowl in front of her along with a small piece of bread. "Eat slowly," he said gently. She nodded gratefully and took a small sip. The warmth spread through her chest, calming her entire body. She took another sip and then another, feeling life slowly returning to her. Ethan watched her briefly, making sure she didn't feel uncomfortable. Then he sat across from her. "I don't think I ever asked your name," he said. She wiped her lips with the back of her hand and looked up. "It's Laura," she said softly. "Laura Bennett." "Nice to meet you, Laura," Ethan said with a small smile. "I'm Ethan Reed." Laura smiled back, just a tiny curl of her lips, but it felt warm. "Thank you for everything, Ethan. If you hadn't come along, I don't know what would have happened." Ethan shook his head. "You don't have to thank me for doing what's right." For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply shared a quiet understanding. Laura felt safe for the first time that day, not because of the ranch, but because Ethan didn't expect anything from her. He wasn't trying to impress her or act like a hero, he was just being kind. After she finished eating, Ethan moved the empty bowl aside. "You'll sleep here tonight," he said gently, pointing toward a small spare room on the left. "The bed isn't fancy, but it's clean and warm." Laura hesitated. "What about you? Where will you sleep?" Ethan shrugged lightly. I'll stay out here by the fire. I've slept on worse. Laura wanted to argue, but she didn't have the strength. Instead, she nodded. Thank you. Again. Before she went to sleep, Ethan said, In the morning, I'll take you back to the wagon. I'll fix the wheel and you can continue your journey. Laura smiled softly. I'd like that. But despite the peaceful moment, Ethan's mind kept drifting back to the young coyote. After he ensured Laura was resting, he stepped outside quietly. The night air was cool and filled with the soft sounds of crickets. He saddled his horse again and rode back toward the trail. He didn't want Laura to know. He didn't want to worry her more. But he couldn't leave the injured animal alone for the night. When he reached the spot near the rocks where they had left the coyote, Ethan slid off his horse and knelt down. The young animal was still lying on the grass bed he had made. Its eyes opened weakly when he approached, but it didn't try to move. You're hanging in there, Ethan murmured softly. Good. He reached into his bag and took out a small pouch of water. He dipped his fingers and gently touched the water to the coyote's mouth. The creature licked it slowly, grateful for even the tiny bit of moisture. Ethan stayed there for several minutes, giving it small drops of water and making sure its leg wasn't getting worse. The swelling hadn't grown much. Good news, he thought. You're going to be all right, Ethan whispered. As he sat there under the moonlit sky, Ethan felt something shift inside him. He had always been a quiet man, living his life with simple routines, work, home, sleep. But tonight, he felt something deeper, something rare. He had helped a stranger and a helpless animal, and it made the world feel just a little softer than before. After making sure the coyote was comfortable, he rode back home. When he entered the house, the fire was still glowing faintly. Laura had gone to the spare room. Ethan could hear her soft breathing, steady and peaceful. He added a small log to the fire and sat on the floor, leaning his back against the wall. He didn't feel tired, not in the usual way. His body ached, but his mind felt strangely alive. He thought about Laura. How she had tried so hard to help the injured animal even when she was exhausted. How she refused to leave the coyote even though she was stranded. How she had been brave in her own quiet way. Ethan found himself admiring her strength. She was gentle but not weak. Kind but determined. Someone with a heart strong enough to care deeply, even in frightening moments. As Ethan drifted into a light sleep near the fire, he didn't know that Laura was awake as well. She lay in the small bed, staring at the wooden ceiling. She thought about the moment Ethan had lifted the wagon, risking himself without hesitation. She remembered how he spoke to her, calm, steady, without judgment. She felt grateful, but also strangely connected to him. It was as if their lives had crossed paths at the exact moment they both needed something: comfort, company, kindness. Laura rolled onto her side and closed her eyes, whispering softly to herself, "Thank you, Ethan." Her voice was barely audible, but filled with emotion. The night passed quietly, and dawn arrived with soft golden light creeping across the floor. Ethan woke stiff, but rested. He didn't get up immediately. Instead, he listened to the morning, birds chirping outside, the gentle breeze against the window, and the faint movements from the spare room. After a few minutes, Laura stepped out slowly. She looked better, still tired, but with more color in her face. When she saw Ethan sitting near the fireplace, she smiled shyly. "Good morning?" "Morning," he replied with a nod. "How are you feeling?" "Much better," she said. "Thanks to you?" Ethan stood and stretched. "After breakfast, we'll head out and fix your wagon." Laura paused before responding. She wanted to know something. "Ethan, did you go back to the coyote last night?" Ethan didn't expect the question. He looked down for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I didn't want it to be alone." Laura felt her heart warm. You have a good heart?" Ethan didn't respond, but the faint blush on his cheeks said everything. They ate breakfast together, nothing fancy, just warm bread and a bit of honey. But it felt meaningful, like sharing more than food, like sharing trust. Afterward, Ethan prepared the tools for repairing the wagon. Laura helped him pack, even if her hands were still sore. She wanted to be useful. She wanted to show she wasn't someone who only relied on others. When they stepped outside and the sun warmed their faces, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years, a quiet anticipation, not fear, not loneliness, something gentler, something hopeful. Neither of them knew that the next few hours would change everything. Ethan and Laura rode back toward the broken wagon just as the sun lifted above the hills. The morning light was soft and warm, brushing across the trail and giving everything a gentle glow. Laura held on to the horse's saddle tightly, still a little sore from yesterday's long hours, but she felt much stronger today. Ethan guided the horse carefully, making sure she felt safe with every step. As they approached the familiar curve in the trail, Laura's heart beat a little faster. Everything that had happened yesterday replayed in her mind. The broken wheel, the endless hours of fear, the helplessness she felt, and then Ethan arriving like a quiet miracle. She looked ahead, and there it was. Her wagon, still resting where she had left it, still damaged, still waiting. Ethan brought the horse to a stop and helped Laura down gently. She stood for a moment, taking a slow breath as she looked at the wagon that had caused her so much worry. But now, with Ethan beside her, it didn't feel like a problem anymore. It just felt like something that needed fixing, not something that would break her spirit. "I'll check the wheel," Ethan said, walking toward it with his tools. Laura followed him slowly, wanting to help even if she couldn't do much. Ethan knelt beside the broken wheel and examined it carefully. The damage was bad, but not impossible to repair. He worked calmly, cutting away the broken pieces, smoothing the edges, and preparing the axle for the replacement parts he had brought. His hands moved confidently, showing he had done this kind of work many times before. Laura stood beside him, handing him tools whenever he asked. She watched the way he worked, the patience in his movements, the quiet focus in his eyes. She admired him more with every passing minute. After a while, Ethan paused to wipe sweat from his forehead. "It'll take a little time," he said, "but it'll be strong again." Laura smiled softly. "You're doing more for me than anyone has in a long time." Ethan shook his head. "Just helping someone who needs it." "You don't even know me," she said gently. "You could have just passed by yesterday." Ethan looked at her, meeting her eyes with surprising clarity. "I know enough. You stayed with that injured animal all day. That tells me everything I need to know." Laura felt her heart warm at his words. She glanced in the direction where the coyote had been and wondered if it was still there. As if sensing her thoughts, Ethan nodded toward the rocks. "Go check on it," he said. "I'll be fine here." Laura walked toward the rocks with slow, careful steps. The morning breeze carried the scent of grass and dust as she approached the place where they had left the young coyote. When she reached the shaded spot, she saw a small movement. The coyote was still there, resting but awake. Its eyes watched her quietly, not afraid this time, only cautious. She crouched down gently, keeping her distance so she didn't frighten it. "Hey," she whispered softly. "You made it through the night." The coyote blinked slowly, as if recognizing her voice. Its breathing was steadier, and the swelling in its leg didn't look as bad. Laura felt a wave of relief wash through her. She didn't try to touch it. She knew better than that, but she stayed there for a while, talking to it softly, her voice filled with warmth. "You're strong," she said. "Just hang on a little longer." When she returned to the wagon, Ethan had made good progress. The new wheel was halfway attached, and he was tightening the last few pieces. Laura watched him silently for a moment, thinking about how strange and beautiful it was that two strangers had crossed paths in such an unexpected way. Yesterday, she had been alone, scared, unsure of how she would survive the night. Today, she stood next to someone who felt safe, someone who made the world feel less frightening. "You're almost done," she said, her voice filled with appreciation. Ethan nodded. "Almost." She sat on a small rock nearby, watching him work. She wanted to tell him something important, something she had been holding inside, but she didn't know how he would react. Still, she couldn't leave without saying it. "Ethan," she said softly. He looked up at her. "Yeah?" She took a slow breath. "Thank you. For everything. Not just for helping the coyote, or fixing the wagon, or giving me a place to sleep. Thank you for not making me feel foolish yesterday. I was scared in a way I've never been before, and I didn't know how to handle it." Ethan set down his tool and faced her fully. "Anyone would have been scared," he said gently. "You were stranded alone, with no help in sight, and you still tried to save something weaker than you. That's brave, Laura." "Really brave?" Her eyes softened. No one had ever called her brave before. People usually called her quiet, gentle, fragile, but brave? Hearing that word felt like something inside her shifted. She smiled, not a shy smile, but a real one, warm and grateful. Ethan returned to the wheel, tightening the final piece. After a few minutes, he stood up and stepped back. "There," he said. "Good as new. It should carry you safely." Laura walked over to the wagon and placed her hand on the new wheel. "It's perfect," she said. "Thank you." Ethan dusted off his hands. "You can head to your sister's place now." Laura nodded, but her heart felt heavy. She didn't want to leave so quickly. She didn't want this strange connection to end as soon as her journey resumed. She looked at Ethan quietly, wondering if he felt the same. Ethan began putting away his tools, but she noticed something in his movements, a slight hesitation, as if he didn't really want the moment to end either. She walked closer. "Ethan," she said gently, "would you maybe visit my sister's ranch someday? It's not far from here. I think she'd like to meet you. And I'd like to see you again." Ethan froze for a moment, surprised by the invitation. He wasn't used to people wanting him around. He had lived alone for so long that he believed his quiet life was meant to stay that way. But now, standing here with Laura, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Something comforting. Something familiar yet new. He met her eyes. "I'd like that," he said softly. A warm silence settled between them. Before they left, Laura asked, "Can we check on the coyote together? One last time before I go?" Ethan nodded. "Of course." They walked to the shaded rocks. The young coyote lifted its head when it heard them approach. Ethan crouched down, examining the leg. "It's healing," he said. "Slowly, but it'll survive." Laura smiled with relief. "Good. I was scared it wouldn't make it." Ethan looked at her gently. "It made it because you stayed. It made it because you cared." As they walked back to the wagon, Laura felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from gratitude. She climbed onto her wagon seat and gathered the reins. Ethan stood beside her, making sure everything was steady. She looked down at him. "I'll never forget what you did for me," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "Just glad I was there when you needed someone." Laura hesitated, then reached down and took his hand for a brief moment. Her touch was warm, honest, filled with emotion. She didn't have the courage to speak out loud. Ethan held her hand gently, then let go, allowing her to continue her journey. She straightened in the seat, took a deep breath, and clicked the reins. The wagon began moving slowly, the new wheel rolling smoothly along the dirt trail. Ethan watched her go, standing tall and quiet until she disappeared around the bend. But before she vanished completely, Laura turned back for a final look. Ethan saw her smile, warm, grateful, and full of something unspoken. He lifted his hand in a small wave. She waved back. Then she was gone. Ethan stood alone on the trail for another long moment, feeling the breeze brush past him. He didn't feel lonely, not today. For the first time in years, he felt connected to another human being in a way that didn't fade with distance. As he walked back to his ranch, he knew one thing with certainty. Their paths had crossed for a reason, and something inside him told him their story wasn't over. Not even close.